The 2010s have come to an end, and we are about to enter the 20s. So, just like every other movie person out there, I'm going to be giving you my list of the top 10 movies from the 2010s. Couple things to know before going into the list. Of course, it's my opinion, so please comment below right now what is your favorite movies of the 2010s, because everyone's got different opinions of what movies should be on this list. I'm just going to be giving my opinions, and there are probably going to be some upsets. There are probably going to be a lot of good movies to other people that aren't on this list, so just, sorry in advance for that. Obviously, there's a lot of movies that couldn't quite make the cut, so really quick, I'm just going to rapid fire 11 through 25. Number 25, Pop Star, Never Stop, Never Stopping. Number 24, Interstellar. Number 23, The Art of Self-Defense. Number 22, Knives Out. Number 21, Toy Story 3. Number 20, The Martian. Number 19, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Number 18, Black Klansman. Number 17, The Big Sick. Number 16, Mission Impossible Fallout. Number 15, 22 Jump Street. Number 14, Birdman. Number 13, Parasite. Number 12, Gone Girl. And number 11, The Big Short. If you want even more movies like that from the decade, I'm sure I can give them to you. But for now, we're just going to focus on the top 10. Let's get into it.
Number 10.
So number 10 is going to go out to Inception. Inception came out in 2010, right at the beginning of this decade. And I think this movie still holds up even until today. I think the only reason you wouldn't add it to this list is because in some ways it kind of has been overplayed and kind of overdone to this point because we've seen so many movies like it. And even when you're talking about Christopher Nolan as a director, this isn't the first movie like this that he's done, but I do think that this is kind of the peak of Nolan movies. And obviously, like you saw, Interstellar made my top 25 and The Dark Knight is one of my favorite movies of all time, but Inception is just... again, peak Nolan. I don't know how else to describe it. The term itself, Inception, is a part of culture now. I mean, we use that all the time when you're talking about literally anything. The idea of a dream within a dream within a dream, and these multi-layers, not only the dreams, but to this movie, is one that is being used over and over again to this day. Cinematography, acting, all of it holds up. So by far, this movie definitely deserves to be number 10.
Number 9.
Number 9 is going to go out to Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Another 2010 movie, and let me tell you, this movie absolutely holds up, if not better than the first time you saw it in theaters. Oh, that's right, nobody saw this in theaters. This is absolutely the definition of a cult classic. I can't give myself the title of the one who discovered it first, because technically I watched it when it came out on video that year, but still, over the years, people have grown to love this movie. First off, the cast is incredible, and I know, like, for Michael Cera, he was already kind of known in the late 2000s for a lot of his roles, similar to the character he's playing here, but for a lot of other people in this movie, they weren't even close to being big yet when they were in this movie, and now look at them, they're literally everywhere. But what Edgar Wright does so well in this movie is he makes it feel like this independent film, which it's not really, but the style is so unique. It's something that is just not in mainstream movies that you see. The way that the music and the visuals all match up with one another to tell this story, the lot of Easter eggs that he likes to throw in there. The movie is the definition of a movie that you need to rewatch in order to catch a lot of little things that you didn't notice the first time. So the mixture of all these cinematic creativities that are being used, along with this kind of interesting coming-of-age love story, this movie is fantastic, and I still love it to this day.
Number 8.
The Social Network, again, coming out in 2010, which I'm only now realizing how weird that is that there's 3 back-to-back-to-back. But this movie, depending on who you ask, tells the somewhat realistic story of how Mark Zuckerberg created Facebook. This movie really focuses on the early on issues he had with it, more specifically, several lawsuits that he had with people who claimed that they also helped him create this social media website, and he's getting sued because he stole their property. This movie specifically is just the perfect combination of David Fincher, Aaron Sorkin writing the script, and Trent Reznor doing the music and soundtrack. It is fantastic. The combination of the music and script is really what takes this movie from a good movie to a just near perfect movie. Now, that's not to say the acting isn't incredible as well, and again, we see a lot of familiar faces that we'll see in later movies. But the dialogue is just so interesting, and you just want to just latch onto every word that is being said. I think this movie is important because it really kind of leads the way of this culture of the internet and social media that we never really experienced back in 2010. Watching this movie just a month ago, it is even more powerful today, now knowing what Facebook has become and social media in general and the power that it has over our lives. But the 2010s, we have seen so much toxic internet use from people, from trolls, from just anyone who's getting mad at anyone and getting frustrated and using their rage to do good or bad things, I suppose. This movie really paints a good picture of the danger of that, and I think we are now seeing the real life consequences of what happens when someone gets too angry and has too much power on the internet. Social Network absolutely deserves to be on this list. We need a sequel to this because let me tell you, Mark Zuckerberg faces many more lawsuits after this.
Number 7.
Second Edgar Wright on the top 10. I love Edgar Wright. So Baby Driver is such a fun movie. Everything I said about Scott Pilgrim when it comes to the cinematography mixed with the music, Baby Driver does it 10 times better. Top of the all-star cast, well, okay, it's mostly a good cast. The music and sound editing is flawless in this movie. I think the biggest takeaway from this movie, looking at it throughout the whole decade, is kind of just that point alone, is that this is like the peak of a movie that does that. We've seen a lot of movies that use music to kind of match up with the dialogue or sounds being used in the background, and we've seen a lot of movies that are fun to rewatch and notice a lot of things that you didn't notice the first time, and this movie just does all of that to perfection. When you think of an action movie, a good movie with a getaway driver, there's a lot to come to mind. When you think of a funny movie, one that correlates music with the script, there's a lot of movies like this, but Baby Driver is the combination of all of that, on top of just falling in love with these main characters and wanting to see them succeed. Baby Driver, number 7. I don't know what more I can say about it.
Number 6.
So we know that Pixar movies are powerful. We know that, in the scope of best movies of all time, there's a lot of Pixar movies that fall on the scale. But when it comes to the 2010s, I really think Inside Out deserves that top spot. The other great Pixar movie that I threw on the top 25 was Toy Story 3. But Inside Out really is this unique movie where Pixar is being completely creative and taking every liberty they have to make this a completely original idea. More specifically, why it's so important to the 2010s is because it talks about an issue that has been on the forefront of a lot of conversations, and for the most part in a good way, but I think a lot of it's being negative, and Inside Out really is like, no. We're going to talk about mental health. We're going to do it in a healthy way. We're going to introduce this idea to children. And so adults and children can watch this movie together and have this healthy discussion on what it means to be happy and sad at the same time and how, it's okay to use your emotion. And the way they do that is one of the most creative things I've ever seen. I mean, to have, little emotions battling out inside your head to try to see how you're going to react is one of the most honest ways I've heard mental health be discussed. Funny, it's colorful, it's exciting, it's thrilling, and it's gonna make you think of mental health in a completely new way. So by far, this has been the best animated movie of the decade.
Number 5.
I love Lady Bird, and maybe this is gonna be my bias coming out, because it's not like the most important movie of the entire decade, but hey, this movie is fantastic and nearly flawless. Every generation, every decade, we see that decade's version of a coming-of-age movie, and I really believe that Lady Bird is this decade's coming-of-age movie. There's really not much to it, and it's very straightforward, and there's, the plot, it just kind of jumps around. It's like, this event, this event, this event. Not a lot of it correlates and overlaps. Sometimes it's just little stories that you're seeing being told. And I don't really want to use the term slice of life to describe this, but the case could be made, I suppose. On top of the incredible performances and script and dialogue that is being used in this movie is simple, and I think it really represents what a lot of coming-of-age movies in this decade were like. Nothing overly cheesy or nothing overly dramatic. It's kind of just straightforward, and it's you can put yourself in her position even if you aren't a senior in high school. Another fantastic thing about this movie is that it's nostalgic, but nostalgic for the early 2000s, which is very interesting because we're finally at that point where the 2000s are nostalgic to a lot of us. It's taking songs and popular news stories from that era and all putting it together in this movie where it makes you feel like you were there, because a lot of us were. For a lot of us, that's our nostalgic right now. We remember the early 2000s and look back on it as if we wanted to go back when, why do we want to go back to that time period? This isn't like the coming of age movie you've seen before where you're on the side of the kid the whole time, but you're this daughter, this teenager, she's kind of the worst. And I agree with the parents, and you can really see both sides. And this movie does a great job of presenting both arguments and seeing the just messiness of this relationship.
Number 4.
Coming out in 2016, Damien Chazelle just kills it with La La Land. I love La La Land. So not only being the musical that I think people should remember from this decade, this movie also handles this love story in a very unique way that not a lot of other movies do. The idea of chasing your dream versus working hard for what you want, and how do relationships fit into all of that. It might sound like I'm contradicting Lady Bird a bit, but the way that they handle nostalgia in this movie is completely opposite to Lady Bird, and it's also just as fantastic. There's two different types of nostalgia. There's the one that you relate to, like the early 2000s. Like, for a lot of us, we lived through that, so we remember it, so we're nostalgic to that time period. La La Land presents this time period that we, like, literally, I don't think any of us have lived through. It's like the 30s, the 40s, the golden age of Hollywood, when jazz was very popular. It gives this time period to us. It makes the whole movie feel like this time period, and we're all nostalgic towards that, even though none of us have been through it. The way that Emma Stone explains movies is just beautiful. The way that Ryan Gosling explains jazz is just beautiful. They do such a good job at presenting these two art forms to us, and we just want more of it. We just can't have enough. I mean, I can go on and on talking about their two characters. I can go on and on talking about the music in this movie, but I think you understand by this point that everything about this movie I absolutely love. So this deserves to be one of the best of the decade.
Number 3.
Avengers Endgame. So this, I have no doubt, is going to be the most controversial movie on this list. Here is why I think this is the best superhero movie of this decade. First off, I think that a Marvel movie absolutely needs to be on this list because this decade is just all about superhero movies. There's been some good ones, some great ones, some bad ones, some really bad ones, but everyone is trying to get on board in making these types of films. So the reason I chose Endgame is because it really wraps up the entire 11, 12 years that we've seen of this universe. And I know not every Marvel movie fit into this decade, but for the majority of them, they do fall in this decade. I mean, there's been like 15 to 18 movies in this decade. These stories are all being wrapped up in this movie. On top of that, I do love this movie, so my bias is going to be absolutely showing within that. But I do think this movie takes a serious tone. More than the other ones, it tells a very interesting story about death and moving on and the stake. That, and also, I don't know if we are ever going to see this top tier of a cast. I mean, there are so many A-list actors and actresses in this movie. It is just incredible. So for a lot of those reasons, I do think this movie is culturally important to this decade. And again, why is it number 3? Oh, I do love it. I love everything about this movie.
Number 2.
Damien Chazelle's second appearance on this list. So Whiplash was his first movie that he directed, La La Land being the second. And the third wasn't as great, but needless to say, I mean, he's got to be my favorite director of this decade. And I'm just going to cut right to the chase. J.K. Simmons, this is probably my favorite performance of the entire decade. 100% Oscar worthy, just flawless performance. In a way similar to La La Land, but to the extreme. This movie tells the importance of working hard to achieve your goals, working hard to achieve your dreams, and the cost of that when it comes to having real life relationships, but trying to manage that when you're also trying to be the best at what you do. Now, without a doubt, this movie has been culturally important to YouTube video essays. There are so many video essays trying to interpret this movie, so I'm not gonna even begin to touch on that. What the ending means, does he win, does he lose, is it good, is it bad? But I think that fact does show how important this movie was, because it's one that just leaves it up to interpretation. And then there's jazz. This decade is so just set on bringing back jazz. I love it. I love this movie. Miles Teller, incredible. Damien Chazelle, best director of this decade. Whiplash, number 2.
Number 1.
Get Out. Where do I start with Get Out? The directorial debut of Jordan Peele. He decides to direct a horror movie that talks about race, that talks about politics, but in a way that when you're watching it, it doesn't feel like that. Instead, what this movie feels It feels like a horror movie. It makes you feel uncomfortable. It makes you feel on the edge of your seat. The analogies in this movie, the imagery that is being used, again, I'm a big fan of movies that you can rewatch and see things completely different or see things you missed, little Easter eggs. This movie is full of them. My favorite Easter egg in this movie, and possibly the entire decade, is when the girlfriend is in bed, just being all creepy. She's drinking milk separated from Fruit Loops, separating the whites from the colors. Like, that imagery and symbolism that you don't even really catch the first time is just so powerful. And I don't want to get too preachy on politics or race, but you can't deny the impact that has had on culture this decade. And I think Get Out is the perfect movie to kind of speak on that. On top of that, it's a horror movie. A horror movie is my number one movie of the decade. How crazy is that in the 2000s? Like, would you ever imagine a horror movie making anyone's top 10 list? But Jordan Peele is redefining this genre and making it something worth watching, something that has something to say about culture. And you can tell its impact because when his second movie came out, Us, the debate was, well, what's better, Get Out or Us? And I honestly don't care to have those debates because if they're two great movies, just let them be two great movies. But the other side of it, I love that that's a debate because people are so invested in realizing that anything that this man can do is pretty much incredible. The soundtrack, amazing. The dialogue, amazing. The acting, incredible. The horror will, again, just keep you on the edge of your seat. But more important, this movie has something to say, something that is relevant to this decade. And that's why Get Out is my number one movie of the 2010s. There it is. 10 through 1. I also threw in the top 25. I can't help myself. Let me know what you think. What are your favorite movies of this decade? There's so much to choose from. Again, I could go on and on just talking about just incredible films that were created this decade. So please comment below. Let me know what your favorites were. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. I love talking about movies, doing movie reviews, movie lists like this. Let me know what do you want to see more of, and I will see you next time.